Well, Gene, welcome. Glad you're here. Let me read a bio
Sure.
of who you are, and then we'll have a conversation. Gene Loeffler is the pastor of River of Life Church and president of Lighthouses of Prayer International here in San Antonio. Lighthouses of Prayer was established out of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Crusade in San Antonio in 1997. Lighthouses of Prayer International seeks to advance the kingdom of God around the city, united in prayer. Gene pastored 23 years in California and has been a pastor in San Antonio for the last 10 years. He is a community leader in the area of prayer and collaboration of ministers across denominational backgrounds. Gene earned a Bachelor's of Art from Life Pacific University and a Bachelor of Ministry from King's Theological University and Seminary, which was started by the late Jack Hayford.
Yes.
Gene and I met at a prayer meeting on the northwest side of San Antonio in 2019, a few months before Gene became director of Lighthouses of Prayer. And we've done a number of prayer events since then.
Yes, we have.
And I appreciate you including me in those.
Yes.
I'd like to hear about your salvation experience and your call to ministry.
Yeah.
How did God woo you to himself and then call you into the ministry?
Well, I have to give that credit, and I say credit. Obviously, there's the natural credit, and then there's the supernatural, meaning how God works through our those that are praying for us. So I had a praying mother, and she was a believer. My dad was not. And so there was, that difference in our home. But my mother was faithful at praying daily for my brother and I. So there was a point probably in my earlier teens that I believed in God, but I had never made a commitment to obviously follow him and make him the Lord and Savior of my life. So I was 22 years old when that happened. And I was in the living room of a really good friend of mine, a friend that you know, I think, Ken Bundy, and I grew up together. He's a pastor as well, but this is obviously before all of that. I was preparing to go out one evening and scrolling through the television, as we did, the old Zenith televisions, that had about 15 channels. And I came across an evangelist, and I don't know why but the Lord just really spoke through what he shared as my friend was preparing. And I remember these words that were said: "You'll never be successful without Jesus unless you have Christ in your life."
Yeah.
And that just, I don't know, it was the words that I needed to hear. I responded right there in that living room. There was a small ottoman that I kneeled at, and I asked the Lord to come into my life. And I said, "Lord, I need you, come into my life." And from that day forward, life changed for me. And I just had just a hunger.
How old were you at that time?
22.
22.
22 years old. And, I just, again, I remember just having I wanted to be at church all of the time. I wanted to share my faith wherever I went. It was just almost like an
immediate change.
An immediate change,
Yeah.
yes. It was 180 degrees, obviously, change. And so that's when I got, that's when I had my salvation experience. And just continued to walk with the Lord for the next year and a half or so. And then from there, went on to school, and then I went to a theological seminary in Los Angeles. And that's where I got started in ministry, was there in Los Angeles, California.
And that was just at King's
Theological Seminary, yes. Yes.
Tell us about King's. It was started by Jack Hayford.
Jack Hayford, yes. Jack Hayford, there were several ministers that obviously, that impress you as young, as a young man that was trying to learn. And there were, Billy Graham was obviously one of those that was one that Lloyd Ogilvie there in Hollywood, Presbyterian pastor that ended up becoming the Senate chaplain later on. There's others that I could mention, but Jack Hayford was one of those individuals. I just loved his scholarship and the relationship of how he taught in some areas that I just didn't have a very good understanding, the things pertaining to the gifts of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And he really helped, I think, to broaden my understanding in that area. And so that is where I ended up getting my master's of ministry there at the King's Theological Seminary. And then my first pastorate was there in Los Angeles in 1992.
92. How long were you there?
I was there at that church, not very long, actually. That was my shortest tenure. I was there, I think, for about 14, 15 months. And then went to Orange County and Huntington Beach, Orange, so like a couple of places, and just loved living in Southern California. The Jesus movement had taken place in the late 60s, early 70s. My wife was a product of that movement.
The Jesus movement.
Yeah, because she was from the Costa Mesa area, where at that time it was Chuck Smith.
Chuck Smith.
Yeah, he was the one that was the key leader that a lot of those young kids followed at that time, was impacted by his ministry, Calvary Chapel. And so my wife, coming out of that movement, and still to this day, there's still a residual impact of that movement on the West Coast.
The movie that came out a year or two ago was a great movie, but that impact of that movement still is affects today, because some of those leaders that came out of that movement, like your wife and others, are still in ministry. And so that movement has shaped for decades.
Generation.
Yes,
absolutely.
For decades.
Yeah, my wife was, I think she said 8 years old she talks of a very strong encounter.
Yeah.
She was in a small neighborhood Lutheran church, and so the Jesus movement, it didn't discriminate wherever it went. It just went through those young individuals, a lot of teenagers that God just began to move upon, and 16, 17, 18, all the way up to early 20s, and then it just exploded into all the communities there. And she just said she remembers going to the beach where they were baptizing thousands of people.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and people just responding, and it was just the Spirit of the Lord was just hovering over that area.
Our nation needs something like that again.
Absolutely. And I think that's where you and I have such a kindred heart and spirit. We realize, those are real needed moments for, your nation, your cities, your states, your churches. Revival is important. When you think about the revival culture, that's, I believe, what sustains us spiritually and keeps us healthy and strong in the things that God has purposed and caused us, to be as a people.
So you were in California, I think I read 23 years or so.
Yep.
Pastoring.
Yep. 23 years pastoring there in California. And again, as I said earlier, I just loved being there. I loved the weather.
Yeah.
I'm actually from San Antonio, so I grew up here, and then, as I said, went to California, and that's where my schooling took place. And then, obviously, the opportunities that opened up for me, and so just ended up, there for all of those years. And I have 4 sons. And
tell us how you met your wife.
So met my wife, we met in school, and my wife was actually involved in lots of ministry well before me. She was, I don't want to say a missionary, but she was doing a lot of missionary work. And she done work in Asia, done lots of things there. And again, it was just because of what had taken place early in her life that put her on that pathway to serve the Lord. And so we met each other in California, and we got married, and she was well ahead of the game before me. And I always say she's my hero. And then when we got married and started the first church that we served in together, we started to have a family, and that's when she became a full-time mom.
Yeah.
And we ended up having, like I said, 4 sons. Have 1 grandson now added to that
Well,
group.
congratulations.
Yes, and my wife is still waiting for other than, she's got a daughter-in-law, but she's still waiting for a granddaughter.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see if that happens. But so Becky and I have served together in ministry, and and it's awesome. We're actually celebrating 35 years of marriage this year.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Not many things in our culture last 35 years.
35 years.
Especially marriages. So.
Yes. Well, and the pressure as a minister, pressure pastoring people. I don't know if you see this or not, but it seems like obviously the culture has changed so much in the last 35 years that it's actually harder today as pastor leaders in the church as we, this generation. I think there's been so many things technology-wise that get introduced into, the culture of the generation that, it ends up, we were talking about, the things that people have to deal with and how hard it is, the traumas that are brought into one's life, and you have to deal with that. It just seems like that's gotten harder in my latter years as a minister. I don't know if you feel that way.
Culture definitely has changed, and the context is different. Just the worldview of the younger generations coming up sometimes makes it a lot more challenging.
Yeah.
Life was a lot more simple when we were kids.
That's right.
than
Yeah.
it is today.
That's so true.
There's a lot that makes it not simple nowadays.
Yeah.
So you've been in San Antonio for a decade.
Yes.
Tell us what brought you here. How did God work in your life to bring you back to San Antonio?
That's such it takes a little time to develop that, because unless I kind of give a little bit of the history of how we got here, then it won't make sense.
Yeah.
In the sense. So I got saved at the age of 22. I loved playing golf as a young man. I started playing golf real young at life. And so one day I had made a trip to go to a golf course on the south side of the city called Pecan Valley Golf Course. And those that are listening that are golfers will remember Pecan Valley, because it was a high caliber golf course. Anyway, on my way there, I was at an intersection, and I heard the Lord. I never have heard the audible voice of the Lord, but you just hear that inner voice. And as I was there at that intersection, I heard this voice: "You will pastor a church here." And it was so pronounced that I would come back to that location, even when we were visiting. When we were living in California, we'd come back and visit family. I'd go back to that intersection. It was just kind of like my Bethel moment,
Yeah.
my altar moment. And so, again, I was 24 when that happened. So just a couple of years after I had my spiritual encounter, my salvation encounter. So I had been serving, as I said, the last church there in California, and things were going really well. We had a good church attendance, healthy, but it just seemed like we were, being stirred. And my wife knew about that encounter, but she had said, Daryl, she said, "I will never move to San Antonio." She had noticed our being a Southern California girl and Jesus movement, all the good things that we had done there, and our kids were growing up there. But she also felt that stirring. And so she knew my ties with Jack Hayford. I had been mentored underneath him, had been an independent pastor for most all of my years, influenced really by the Calvary Chapel influence, because Chuck Smith was just down the road. So spent a lot of time in relationship there. And like I said, Jack Hayford was in Los Angeles, and I got a chance to know him and spend some time with him. And so Becky knew he was a part of a denomination called Foursquare.
Yeah.
And again, because we have that mutual respect for him, she took my resume and she just threw it out there to Foursquare without me knowing it. And she didn't even get my approval. So
She's being proactive.
She's been proactive. So we got responses from all the districts except what they called the Southern District, which was Texas and 5 other states. So long story short, She responded to them again, asked why we didn't get a reply or a response, and they ended up responding with an email. I had an interview. They began to ask, why do you want to leave? And didn't say that I was really that eager to leave. But if something was to open up that I felt the Lord, had directed us to, I would be perhaps open-minded to that. And so we got to talking about, what I had been doing as a pastor. And so we started talking about 6 states that the Southern District represented. And I said, I'm not really interested in going to just any state. I have a good setting here. And they just began, this is the supervisor. I'm having the interview with assistant supervisor, and says, well, we do have an opportunity that's coming up in San Antonio. And when he said San Antonio, then I began, my ears peaked up a little bit. But he said, and it's on the south side, and it's at such and such church. And it was that very intersection, and at the age of 24, that encounter happened. And so I knew at that point the Lord was stirring us, but also bringing a direction.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we ended up going through a whole year of interviewing and vetting, and a year later we were here in San Antonio. And here we are today. And the place that my wife said I'll never move to, she moved to.
She's been here for a decade now.
She's been here for a decade, and I'm so grateful. When we made the decision, I said, we had 6 in our family, and I said we have to have 6 raised hands. We all have to agree if we're going to go. They all raised their hands.
They all raised their hands.
Yeah, and my oldest at that time was in college, and so they all raised their hands, and we loaded up the truck and moved to San Antonio.
Loaded up the truck and moved to Beverly Hills.
Yeah. Wasn't Beverly Hills, but
so
we moved.
What was it like your first Sunday in the pulpit?
Here in Texas?
Yes. Knowing that God had spoken to you, and then now the completion of what he had said came to pass for your life. And
well, the reality, it started to sink in, as you said, the first Sunday. How you have this emotional kind of high as you know that, the Lord is putting things and choreographing, but it's not always, you don't always stay at that high. There's a reality that begins to settle in because of the difference in culture. Where we had served for so long, we had relationships, we had connections, and so we were starting over and trying to get an understanding of the context of where we were at, and so that I knew was going to be the challenge, and so did my wife, and so we knew prayer was going to be very, very important for us to move forward. So we developed a group of people to begin praying into that, not just here in San Antonio, but also in California, because they were with us in this transition. And that, I believe, looking back, was probably the most important thing that we did, was to build a prayer team that would help. Because we went through the first 12 months, 18 months, the battle was on. And there was lots of principalities and powers and authorities that were confronted in the natural realm and the spiritual realm. And so it required that prayer pursuit to help us to get through that. And then as we got through that, we began to, the Lord began to just raise my chin also to the need of the city. I always say this, Daryl, that what's important is if you're really going to minister in a city well, you have to have the city in your heart.
Yeah.
The need of the city, and one of the things I felt like, again, as I journal a lot, and I go through the scriptures, and I just try to Lord, what are you saying through this? And one of the things that I remember specifically writing down in my journal that I felt the Lord had spoken to my heart is, I want you to walk across the city. And I didn't think that was literal, but I had read a book by Bill Hybels, Walk Across the Room. So it was very relevant to me in the way of become aware of the surroundings in the room that you're walking in. Become aware of the city in which you are ministering in. And so I started to really walk on the west side, the south side, the east side, and north side, trying to become familiar with what the city is like. I grew up here, but it had changed in all those years. So it was really the Lord working his heart into my heart and lifting my chin at the same time, so I could minister from a place of really seeing the need of the city. And then from there, I think that helped to shape how I could pray for it.
Yeah. So you've been here 10 years.
Yeah.
At some point, you became connected with Lighthouses of Prayer.
Yes.
How did that take place? And then now you're the director. Obviously, there was the first connection and then a process to where you became director.
Yeah. That's, I'm fascinated how God leads you. As I said earlier, you've had mentors. As I said earlier, I've had mentors. One of those who mentored me was Jack Hayford, and he had a strong emphasis on prayer. And so that was just something, that was really laid as a strong foundation, was prayer. And so when I had an invitation to become a board member of Lighthouses of Prayer International, and it was just an invitation. So I prayed about that, felt like that was an important organization to be a part of. I knew that it was a women's ministry at that time. There was no men. And so, but I believed in the vision of it. It was birthed out of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Crusade of 1997. So it had endured almost 20 plus years of ministry.
There are people that still talk about Billy Graham being here in 97.
It was an amazing, I wasn't here, but I've seen pictures of it, and 65,000 people inside, 10,000 people outside. Incredible impact, and I do believe that.
I was in language school in Costa Rica in 97.
Is that right?
But
wow.
There are people still here that
talk about
today
it.
that talk about the impact on the city.
Yeah, there's pastors and friends that we know that were there and talk about that. You're absolutely right. So I just became a part of the board, and the very first board meeting that I attended was in January of 2020. And at that meeting, the founder at that time was a woman by the name of Joan Courtney. She announced her going to be retiring, and that she was looking for a male to replace her. And at that time, when she said those words, again, I just felt like, I just heard something in my heart. I want you to do this. I didn't share it with anybody. I took it home to my wife, said, hey, I think the Lord is maybe stirring me into maybe considering throwing my application in there. And she had immediately said, you can't do that. Your plate is full. And I said, well, we need to pray about it. So we did, and so we left it at that. We won't pursue it, and if God wants us to do it, he'll pursue us. And that's what happened. A couple of 48 hours later, they contacted me and said, hey, would you consider this? And I just felt like that was, again, the way the Lord was really affirming, confirming that this is something, a door that he was opening. God
opened the door. You didn't open it. You didn't go knocking.
I didn't.
But you felt impressed, and he confirmed it by opening the door for you.
Opening the door, yeah. And then obviously there, looking at it, it was going to be, for me, quite an undertaking because I had never led a ministry like that, and I knew it was a prayer ministry, and it was going to be different, and it was women, only women. And I'm like, well, where do you start with that? And that's when COVID hit.
Yeah.
In March, and they shut the building down for 6 months. But you and I started to kind of get connected, and
we got connected a couple of months before you became director.
That's right.
We were at a prayer meeting.
That's right. Yeah.
And it was on the northeast side of San Antonio, over on 1604.
Well, someone here in the city had told me about you, that you were working for SABA and that you really had a heart for the city and prayer. And so I knew that much about you. And then I was told that you were there at that meeting. And I don't remember how many were there, but I do remember that's where I went over and we introduced ourselves to one another, and I think we had lunch shortly after that. And it just seems like the dominoes began to fall from there, opportunities.
And then you put together a group of 12
pastors, yeah.
And you invited me to be a part of that group, which I was glad to do. And we met for well over a year.
2 years. 2 years for 24 months we met every Friday.
Had a lot of prayer meetings.
Yes.
Joint prayer, open prayer meetings.
Yes.
Visiting a lot of different churches.
Yes.
Yeah, it was had a once a month Sunday night prayer meeting. Those were great.
Yeah, we were We were, battling a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
We knew that was impacting the church. It was impacting our young people. It was just impacting the health of nations. And it was just something that the Lord, I think, really brought together in those 12 pastors.
What was nice, I thought, was during the prayer meeting, everybody had a certain number of minutes. And, the variety of pastors that came and prayed, you got a whole variety of prayer and personalities.
Yes.
But everybody was together praying.
Right.
Praying for the city, praying for unity.
Yep.
It was a great event.
Yeah,
great events.
I look back on that, and I know that the Lord was using that again to unite, because we're from different backgrounds, as you said, and also different parts of the city, which also blended us together. And we purposely did that. We wanted to make sure and pray, on the different parts of the city, so it would include that. And
Pastors from different backgrounds were all invited.
Mm-hmm.
I came. Sometimes I brought 2 or 3 guys with me, some of our pastors.
That's right.
And they were all excited to participate.
Yeah.
There were a lot of good Sunday night prayer events.
And the other thing that it really, I think, really for me, it really built relationship.
Yeah.
So we had the assignments of prayer that we went through, but it was also building relationships, and those relationships are still here today. And so when it comes points where we feel like we need to be praying, you call on those guys. It's like, I'll be there. And so that's what I feel also out of that kind of that time of pressure and distress. The Lord was developing a team of leaders and pastors that
from all over the city
that would join together. Yeah, and still we're part of some of that. Those pastors that are meeting and talking about, Lord, what do you want us to pray for in our city that you've placed us in? So
where do you see LPI today, and where do you believe it's headed? In the future?
Good question. I feel that, and in my role as the director, president, those are titles, but my heart that I feel that as a pastor of my years of pastoring, that's where my heart is to really gather and collect pastors together and to give opportunity for us to come together to pray. I just really believe in what Psalms 133 says, that how good and pleasing it is to the Lord when brothers dwell together in unity. And at the end, it speaks of the blessing that the Lord brings to that group. And it doesn't say how many. And so, if it's 6, 26, 106, that there's a blessing. It pleasures the Lord. So that unity. So you asked the question at LPI, where we headed. There's a couple of things that we are preparing for in the months to come. National Day of Prayer. LPI now is we have been coronated as the leaders of the National Day of Prayer, and so we will be leading that May 1st this year, Main Plaza at 11:30 to 1 o'clock, and so assembling leaders and pastors to pray at that event. The day before is the National Day of Prayer Pastors Prayer Breakfast.
Yeah.
So we're preparing for that as well. So these are things I think that allow us to, again, facilitate that unity. The other piece that we do, we have neighborhood prayer. We gather people that want to join, focusing on a prayer focus for our city. We're in the midst of resetting that. And a part of, again, the mission is to advance the kingdom of God in the city, united in prayer. So there are other things happening in the city that I feel like it's incumbent upon us to come beside and help them to flourish and to use our influence of prayer to do that. Yeah. And so focusing on. So it's not just trying to platform LPI, but it really is how can God use that prayer influence, that prayer voice to help others flourish in our city and to come behind. And I think there's something that's really happening, and I don't know if we have enough time to talk about it, but maybe just briefly. In 1925, there was a revival in San Antonio that was birthed out of the First Baptist Church downtown San Antonio, where they said it impacted 10% of the population at that time.
Wow.
Incredible results of that revival. Thousands and thousands of people collected over the Memorial Weekend at that time, which I say Memorial Weekend. At that time, they didn't have a memorial holiday, but it was during those dates of the 24th, 25th, and 26th of May in 1925 that they collected at the San Pedro Springs Park. And they had 7 churches come together, and there was a revival. And there's one particular photo, and I think you've seen it, that they have 20,000 people that collected in one day. And you see 7 pastors in the water, in their suits, baptizing all of these people that are coming to the waters. The 100-year anniversary is in 2025. Yeah, a couple of months, San Pedro Springs. So again, that's an opportunity, I think, to use, the influence of prayer. We've been praying into that, and lots of pastors have been joining, in the city, because obviously revival is the language of the heart of the pastor. And so I think that, so this is, part of my mission to see where is the Lord working, and then bringing the influence of prayer into that, or where there's a need, and bringing the influence of prayer into that area of need.
100 years.
Yes,
That's
100
amazing.
years.
Yeah,
and have pictures to as evidence of what took place there. And First Baptist has a number of pictures, because that's where it had come out of. And so, yeah.
How could somebody get connected to Lighthouses of Prayer?
Easiest way is to our website is lighthousesofprayer.org. lighthousesofprayer.org, sanantonio.org. And that will bring you to our website. You'll be able to see the prayer focus. You'll be able to get information. And as I said, we are resetting this, and hopefully that we'll have this all done before we go into the National Day of Prayer, which is, again, May 1st, and it will be done. But
I'm sure you have a donate button on
we have a donate
webpage.
button, absolutely. And thank you for bringing that up, because oftentimes it's incredible. People always talk about the importance of prayer, but we oftentimes don't realize it's important to also, if you can give to organizations
that emphasis.
Influence and emphasize prayer. Well appreciated.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time. Good to get to know you. I know you well privately, but for everybody to get to hear your story. And we're glad you're here in San Antonio.
Yeah.
I was just thinking as you were talking, I've been here 10 years, and you've been here 10 years. We came probably close to the same time.
Wow, I didn't know that. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you inviting me. I think the world of you. I have great respect for what you're doing here in San Antonio, and I'm grateful that he brought us together to work together.
Yes.
To see our city flourish.
Yes.
Spiritually.
Well, God's using you in our city in a great way, and thank you for your time, and we'll have you back.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.